All right, this is the Investor Coaching Show, and I am Paul Winkler. And he is Evan Barnard, and he is
Here.
You're always trying to figure out how I'm going to start the show, so I'm going to do it differently every single time.
See, there you go. Keeping people
Barnard.
engaged.
Just quit your stuff, man.
Bueller.
Okay, so I'm in rare form today. No, I'm not in rare form. This is normal form. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. So, guys, this is something I've been thinking deeply about for the past couple of days.
Lay it on us.
And I'm just thinking about in the theme of why we do stuff the way we've always done it, because of previous generations having done things in a certain way. And we just carry these things on much to, it can have bad outcomes when it really comes to retirement planning, especially because a lot of times people don't do retirement. And I'm going to get back to that. I'm going to get back to retirement planning. But I ran into this thing that I thought this would be a good topic just to talk about regarding how we have these ruts, so to speak, that we get into as humans, and we don't change the way we do things, even though changing would be a better thing to do. And it was this thing about the standard railroad gauge. And if you look at the distance between the rails of trains, right?
Right.
And you go, well, what's the distance? Well, it's 4 feet, 8.5 inches. And you go, that's kind of a really, really odd number. 4 feet, 8.5 inches. Where does that number come from? And, you get into it and you go, okay, so this is how they built trains in England. And they designed the first trains that were used in America in England. And you go, okay, so why did they make them that way? Well, because the first rail lines were built by the same people that made the wagon tramways. Right. You remember seeing those old pictures back, where you were literally goes back to 16th century, where you were hauling coal with horses on tracks.
Yeah, it looked like a trolley,
horse-drawn
trolley.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was the tramway, and that was the gauge that they happened to use, 4 feet and 8.5 inches. And you go, well, why did they make it that width? It was because the jigs and the tools that they used to build the wagons made the wheel spacing that way. So that's why they did it, right? And then you go, okay, so why did the wagons have this particular odd wheel spacing? And the reason gets down to, well, had these long distance roads in England, and that was the spacing of the wheel ruts. And the thing is, you had these rutted roads, and the reason that they were rutted is because, previous vehicles that went down there caused those ruts. And the reason is because the Roman legions... Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Evan, having military background, would probably know this kind of thing. I had no clue. I did not know any of this stuff. And if you made it a different distance apart, the wheels would actually break apart, is the problem. So you got these wagon wheels that we use, and that was the distance between them. And you go, okay, so, all right, I get that. But why that distance? Why were the ruts in the road that different? Well, because the Roman war chariots formed the initial ruts over in Europe. So that's why it was that distance. And, these 4 feet, 8.5 inches. That was the original specifications for the Imperial Roman war chariot. And you look at this and go, okay, what does that lead to? Well, that leads to going, so why was it that distance? Well, it was because two horses together, that was so a couple of horses' butts are why we had that distance.
Is this a political statement? This is all going to get down to two horses behind?
No, not at all, not at all. So if you look at this and you go, okay, so what does this lead to? Well, the space shuttle has these solid rocket boosters. And the engineers would have actually liked to have made these solid rocket boosters wider, but they couldn't because they had to get them to the Space Center on rails, which went through mountains, which were cut. They had the holes cut in the mountains, and you had to go through it, and it had to fit through that. So literally, our space shuttle technology has its origins going back 2,000 years.
Interesting.
And you just look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating. And I'm thinking about financial planning, and I'm going, so why is it? Because I've been teaching this workshop, and this series of workshops on financial planning. And so why is it that most people don't engage in financial planning? As you like to say, people spend more time planning their vacations than they do planning the longest vacation they'll ever be on, which is their retirement. And I'm thinking, well, why don't people? Well, you think about it. We learn so much from the previous generation, the household that we grow up in and the people that we spend time with in our youth.
Yeah.
And I never saw my father doing a whole lot of time planning retirement. Really never saw my neighbor's parents spending a whole lot of time planning for retirement. Well, why didn't they spend a lot of time? Well, the reason was because pensions. I mean, they had pensions, and they worked for companies, they worked for governments that had pension plans.
And life expectancy.
Well, I'm getting to that. That's another one. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, you
right.
get that as well. Life expectancy, people didn't live as long. And, you think culturally, collectivism would have been a bigger deal because people actually lived in households with their parents. There was something I saw, it was like in the 1600s, the average size of a family household was like 40 people. And then you go into, it was huge. People lived in many generations under one household. And then it got down to 20 people, a couple centuries later. And now it's down to like 3, and then it's down to like 1, right?
We're at 4 and we're still kicking 2 out of the house, man.
I know. It's like we live in much. So you think about it. If you live in a household back in previous centuries that was that large,
right.
If you had to retire, you had a lot of other people that could take care of you.
They had their own insurance company.
They really did.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about that. I mean, you didn't need a lot of the insurances that you need now back then. So why plan for insurance, or why would you ever learn? That's a really good point, Evan. I mean, you think about why do you have to learn those types of things? Why do you have to learn the craft of investing if your company did all of the investing on your behalf through the pension plan?
Yeah.
And then the reality of it was that, companies now have so much competition from all around the world that they had to find ways to cut costs. So what can we do to cut costs? Well, other countries around the world are still living in collectivism. Many of them, when you think about it, they still live in collectivist type of an atmosphere. So they don't need some of the things that we in America need because of our individualistic type of system that we have. That's just our culture.
Right.
Right. Now, neither right or not wrong. I'm not saying it's good, bad, or anything or anything like that. But that is so interesting to me that we've actually had to go and cut something out that would help us cope because of the fact that we're competing with other cultures that don't have the same issues that we do. So if you look at that and say, okay, now these companies, it's being the lowest cost provider is really the most important thing. We have to cut out that. So what do? We hand over the job of saving for retirement to the individual. So, that's one of the things. And you think about Germany. Well, we didn't even get retirement wasn't even a thing.
Right.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't until 1881 that Otto von Bismarck actually came up with this idea and he was in competition politically and had to come up with something that people would vote for.
Right.
And that's where that all came from. So the whole idea of an old age social insurance program came from, literally 1881 Prussia. I mean,
Yeah.
So
who also learned from the Roman legion, but that's another story.
Yeah, there you go. So we look at this and go, okay, so this is really interesting to me that we don't do this planning because culturally it has never been a thing to do planning. And maybe we have to learn to change things. Maybe we have to learn that this is a responsibility that we have, and we have to actually take some time to do this because, it is such an important thing. So that's one thing. And then Social Security was another one. I was actually talking to one of the guys in your office, and he goes, well, yeah, Social Security is another good example, Paul. Uh-huh. And I said, yeah, you look at the 1980s and taking Social Security, you took it at age 62. That was the optimal age to take Social Security at that point in time. And it was because of demographics. It was because of, if you looked at mortality tables and interest rates, it just made more sense at that particular point in time. And, And for some people, it actually makes a whole lot more sense, to actually delay it even longer. And of course, the age for Social Security is later.
Right.
And, you have to really weigh that decision. But it's just funny how we cling to things. And there are people right now that just as soon as I'm eligible for Social Security, I'm going to take it. And I'm going to grab it as soon as I possibly can. And that may or may not be a good idea. Because people say, well, they're going to reduce Social Security later. And I go, well, they're probably going to reduce it across the board. If, it's going to be, if your benefit was going to be $2,000 and it's going to be reduced by 20%, it's going to be $1,600. If it was going to be $1,000, they're going to reduce that and it's going to be $1,600. So it's still going to be half of a benefit. And it's not necessarily a good idea. But it's I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing. Are there other things you guys think about that? Why we always do things the way we do them in retirement planning?
Well, I know early on, and we're almost at the next, S curve of a generation that adopted something. But early on in my career, my clients' parents never had long-term care insurance.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of back to the family unit and life expectancy and so forth. And then all of a sudden, nursing homes actually became a thing. And then the insurance industry said, well, hey, let's create nursing home insurance and long-term care insurance. And it was kind of the Wild West early on. But that was, I'm going to use the term hard sell, not from the standpoint of, thumb screws, but just it was a new concept of, well, gee, my mom and dad never had long-term care insurance, and so we do learn a lot of those things from our parents.
Right.
And their parents didn't have nursing home insurance. And so it's just kind of a new thing. We're kind of at the point where a lot of people that were the early adopters, their kids are now 55, 60, and they've at least had some experience with, I had a family member that had cover, that's been one of the generational
technology,
things,
you think about technology too. You go back 30, 40 years and the technology wasn't there to keep people alive as long.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in the greatest of shape either.
Right.
You might be living into your 80s and 90s, not in the greatest of shape, but that shows you just the desire of humans to keep going on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even though you may not be in the best of shape, you don't go and say, hey, you know what, can you just cut the cord? And I don't want to do this anymore. People have an unbelievable desire to carry on. I remember my father actually used to talk about that, and he said, if I ever get in that condition, you can just shoot me. He would literally say that.
I've heard that for years.
Well, he got in that condition, and he never asked us to do that. It's a whole different story. We don't have that desire. But what happens is as time goes on, the technology gets better, and it's not that it's always terrible that you're always in horrible shape and you wish you weren't around.
Yeah.
But the technology has had it so that we do need more help later on in life many times. So that definitely happens. And then I also think about, just as we age and you talk about long-term care and those types of things, I think it'll be interesting to see how changes will come about in the future that we'll have to plan for, because technology will make it so that we don't necessarily need the nursing homes, because we may automate a lot of things. You have an automatic robot that runs around and cleans up your house and vacuums.
Rosie.
Yeah, exactly. You get Rosie from the Jetsons. Yeah, exactly. There you go. Make yourself irreplaceable, right? As much as you can.
You mentioned something I hadn't really even given much thought when you were talking about early on.
Right.
It made sense to take Social Security at 62 and so forth.
Right.
I've been surprised that the Social Security Administration, and it's it'd be political nightmare, but I've been surprised that they haven't changed the 7 and 8% growth rate.
Right.
Now that we're in this 1-2% interest rate environment, and that was kind of a slow rate, which led to some of that making sense, and that really hasn't adjusted over the years with
the
declining
mortality
interest
table
rates.
that they're using is old. It's like 1980s mortality tables too, So it's really bizarre.
Yeah.
I was reading something the other day, and I thought, wow, you think, well, That is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But that's the reason that the growth rate is so high, is because they're using such old mortality tables. So you think about it, people were dying much younger, and therefore you had to give them a much greater increase in benefit to get them to put it off to age 70 was really what it got down to. So that made some sense to me. But, it just kind of goes down to how we just never change things. We just, it reminds me of a pastor actually told the story one day. He used to like to tell this story about this lady that was, she was cooking with her mom around Thanksgiving, and they had the ham, and she would cut the ham, the ends off, and she says, "Mom, why do we do that?" And the mother goes, I really don't know, but we've always done that. And then she says, "Well, my mom always used to do it." And she says, "Well, I'm going to go talk to Grandma." And she goes talk to Grandma, and she says, "Well, Grandma, why do we cut the ends of the ham off?" And the grandmother goes, "Well, because, I always had this pan that was too short." And I couldn't fit it in unless I cut the ends of the ham off. So, when we think about retirement planning, you don't necessarily want to do things the way your parents did it, which is no planning. Think about it, as Ira likes to say, as the longest vacation that you will ever take, and you would plan for your vacations. Planning for retirement, probably not a bad idea either. Hey, this is Paul Winkler. Hope you enjoyed today's edition of the Investor Coaching Show. If you want to learn more about what we do, go to our website, paulwinkler.com. You can watch some of the videos there, and if you're not already a client, you can set up a free initial consultation. Until next time, I'm Paul Winkler, reminding you that I believe that more educated investors are more confident investors, and confident investors are more successful investors. Have a great one.